Hello and welcome to episode 60 of Virgo and the Freak. I'm that bloke from Rugby League Project, Andrew Ferguson. You can find me on Twitter at AndrewRLP. And join me once again is League Freak, who you can find on Twitter at League Freak. How you going there, mate?
Pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. What's been going on? You watching a bit of retro footy?
I was watching retro footy. It was good to see some of the players of yesteryear plying their trade. Really interesting watching some of the tactics they were using, the way they played the game. And yeah, I didn't realise they played games from that far back. So that was pretty cool to see that. I'll have to keep an eye out for that.
Absolutely. Now, this week we've seen the NRL reveal the nominations for the Hall of Fame. So we're going to have a look at all of those and wouldn't say argue, but discuss, I guess, who should probably get picked out of that lot.
Yeah.
So first of all, we'll go through the criteria as to how someone gets picked to be in the Hall of Fame. Okay, so the 100 greatest players that were selected in 2008 were automatically included.
Yeah.
6 new players were inducted in 2018. The criteria is the players must be retired for at least 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
A minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4 players are to be inducted every year from 2019. Coaches, referees, and contributors will be considered from this year. A minimum of 1 coach and or referee and a maximum of 2 will be inducted once every 4 years. And a minimum of 1 contributor and a maximum of 3 will be inducted once every 2 years.
Wow. Once again, reach for the abacus.
Yeah, look, I'm happy for them to be constantly adding to the Hall of Fame and things like this, but I think these figures they've got there in place are excessive. Like if they want to have players being added to the Hall of Fame every year, make it 1, maybe 2, not 4.
Or even open up the Hall of Fame every 5 years for new inductions, something like that. I think that would be a better idea than having it every single year. And basically, I mean, you create a rod for your own back, having to select somebody. Like, that's not how the Hall of Fame should be, put together, where you have to select someone. That's not what it's supposed to be about.
That's exactly right. I don't mind coaches and referees being included in the Hall of Fame. There has not been very many of those. So I don't think it's wise to be adding a heap of those every year either. Maybe 1 every 5 years or so, or 2 every 5 years would be more than enough.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, from the whole history of Australian rugby league, and we're just talking about that at the moment. If I said list the 20 most significant coaches in the history of the game, you'd start to have to really think towards the end of that list. And, they're going to fill that up eventually. And it's not going to be too long from now that they are going to fill that up. And, at what point do you start looking at, you start making excuses like, well, he didn't win a premiership, but he was a pretty good coach still. And that, to me, is where you run into problems. Where is it a Hall of Fame or does everyone get a gong?
Exactly. And when you consider that Justin Holbrook will become the 297th coach in the game's history, there's not many there to pick from. You can't be picking one every year.
Exactly.
Referees are similar. There's not a huge amount of those. Probably the same number as coaches. Best.
I mean, it's like, and what a referee's job is to obviously control the game to a certain extent. So if they're all doing their job, like how do you become a Hall of Fame referee as opposed to just a normal referee that's not in the Hall of Fame that also just did their job? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, look, I think in the past, especially the early days, some of the referees would, and I'm talking at the very start of the game, they had more than one role. So Ted Hooper, who I wrote about ages ago, he became a manager for the New South Wales side. He took them to their first ever game in Melbourne. He took them on a tour to New Zealand. That's the sort of thing that those blokes did. And so they became board members as well of the New South Wales Rugby League. So they took on a lot more duties than just being a ref in the middle. So I've got no issue with players with refs like that being added.
Mm-hmm.
But when you consider that in, say, 2-3 years' time, the most capped referee in the game's history will be Ben Cummins.
Yeah. And it's nothing against Ben Cummins. He does the job and he does it really well. But, and that's the thing. Let's look at Hollywood, right? Bill Harrigan.
Mm-hmm.
You could have said Hartley too, but let's look at Bill Harrigan. He would be one of the ones that would be coming up pretty quickly if we're going to start introducing referees to a Hall of Fame. But what makes him a Hall of Fame referee? Is it that he had a high profile? Is it that he made some big decisions in grand finals? Some were right, some of them wrong. Yeah, and what
89. 89.
Yeah, I did say that. It was against the spirit of the game. Get over it.
It's the only penalty in the game's history against the spirit of the game.
He just didn't like how it looked. And so what makes him a Hall of Famer over, somebody else? It's very, very subjective. And I agree with you that you go back to the early days of the game's history, some of the referees were doing and it's a lot of it's like, oh yeah, and they were also a referee. You could almost say they were more a contributor to the game than the actual refereeing. And just calling them a referee was kind of doing them a disservice. And that's where, what are you looking for in a referee? Because we all say it, the best referees, you don't notice them.
Yeah. So that's a tricky one. So it is excessive having that many wanting to be put forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the criteria. So let's get into the first part here. It's administrators.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pick two out of this list anyway. You can see you come up with. So the nominees are James Giltinan, Ted Larkin, Jersey Flegg, Harry Sunderland, Bill Buckley, Ken Arthurson, John Quayle, Ron McAuliffe, Paul Broughton, Frank Johnson, and Ross Livermore.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be picking Edward Larkin. He was the first full-time secretary. He pulled the game out of the absolute pits of misery that it sunk into just after one season. Was involved in the Wallaby coup to pretty much buy the Wallabies, which helped prop the game up and make it, I suppose, competitive with rugby union, and shortly after, more dominant than the game. He got rugby league into Catholic schools in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
And he's even talking about taking the game of rugby league to America in 1910. So he's quite a visionary as well. I've written extensively about him. He's a phenomenal human. One of two sitting politicians who died in war. He died at Gallipoli on the day of landings there in 1915. He was that's the sort of person he was. He led from the front. And if he said that he wanted people to do something, it'd be something that he would do himself.
Yeah.
And the other one would be, which might surprise a few given that I'm a historian, especially from the birth of the game. I'm not going with Giltinan. I'm going to go with Harry Sunderland because of what he did to help Queensland Rugby League and then essentially help get rugby league started in France.
Mm.
He was also a journalist as well, so he can cover that one. But, brilliant administrator and always... He was divisive, but he was also quite a visionary. So I'd nominate those two myself. How about you?
I would have gone, probably from this list, I would have gone Giltinan for sure. Such a big person in terms of starting up the game of rugby league, and was kind of the almost, and we talked about this, when did we talk about this? This might have been in the first episode or so, actually. The rugby league was a sport for entrepreneurs, and he really seemed to be the driving force in that sense when it was starting up.
Definitely.
So I would have selected him. And then, it would be hard to split, Flegg and Sunderland. I think it's very, very difficult. I don't. I only know about Larkin from what you've told me, and look, it's hard to go past him when you hear his story. But not wanting to just agree with you the whole time because it'll make a boring podcast. Like when I would first look at this list, it would be maybe Sunderland. I'd probably lean towards him and Giltinan.
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to go against someone, given that he wasn't just working in Australia. He did a great amount of work over in England too.
Yeah. And look, the thing is, and about these, like I think if you put the four of them in, Larkin, Giltinan, Flegg, and Sunderland, you could probably close the shop for another 10 years, not have to add another administrator, because they're all pretty important in the formation of the game very early on and setting up a lot of the things we take for granted now too.
Exactly. So moving on to the next lot is the media nominees. There's a few in here I agree with, but for the most part, I'm not overly keen on this concept. So we've got Claude Corbett, Peter Ferlingos, Ian Heads, Laurie Kearney, Gary Lester, Roy Masters, John O'Grady, Jeff Prenter, and Jack Reardon. Now, Jack Reardon was a very, very good player for the Roosters back in, the Tricolours then, back in the 30s. He became a journo. John O'Grady, I believe, is the man who took the photo of the Gladiators, which is now the trophy. Roy Masters was a coach, became a very good journo, still is a good journo. Gary Lester, another good journo. Ian Heads. If I've got to pick anyone out of the list, I'm picking Ian Heads. Because he was, for me, he's the first genuine historian who started writing books about all matters rugby league in the past. And I've got a soft spot for anyone to do that, because especially being the first to do that, that's pretty bold. So I'm
and if you've got any books on rugby league, chances are he wrote it. There's
exactly.
not too many.
Yeah, two of his most prominent ones, which if you want to learn about the history of the game that you need to get, is the Kangaroos, where he's gone through every Kangaroo tour from 1908 to 1986. And the other one is True Blue, the history of the New South Wales Rugby League. Brilliant books. So, your thoughts on this one?
I would not have any members of the media involved in this at all. I think that the Rugby League Hall of Fame is for people within the game, and the media are not people within the game. If some of these people are former players who you can build this a fantastic resume together for, and they just also happen to be journalists, fair enough. But I think that journalists are outsiders looking in. They don't contribute to the game. And I don't believe they should be part of the Rugby League Hall of Fame. I think it's an absolutely ridiculous idea. And to be honest, it disgusts me.
Well, given that they're calling it contributors, and they're trying to avoid calling them journalists, a journalist award, it does open itself up in the future with the digital age of League Freak being nominated in about 20 years' time.
And obviously, 20 years' time should be,
Well, we're assuming that the 5-year retirement rule is in place.
Oh, okay,
and
yeah.
I'm assuming that after 15 years, you'll have had enough of this.
I'll put my feet up. Yeah, we'll probably if you go just by current projections, in 15 years from now, we'll kind of both be sitting around in a casino in, Monaco, flicking $1,000 chips at somebody to bring us another drink and just saying, it's probably time to give it up, eh? And, then 5 years after that, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Look, who contributes more to rugby league? A journalist or somebody that goes and, contributes in terms of junior rugby league on the weekends?
Exactly
That
right.
washes jerseys for a kids team, or even marks out the field, or makes sure that the oranges are cut for them and stuff like that. That's a contributor to rugby league. And journalists and media personalities, they do not contribute. They're outsiders. And if they want, any sort of payback for what they contribute, that's what the money's for. They get paid. I just don't like it. I don't like it at all. And there'll be plenty of people that will come up with different sort of arguments to say, well, this person, that person. I will never ever budge on this. I just think it's a disgusting idea that the media is getting any credit for anything within the game. I think that any of the media types that go up and get some of this award should be embarrassed.
Nice.
Yeah, I really do. I really feel strongly about it. They're outsiders, Andrew.
I was going to say, given that you were talking about the volunteers who do work at ground level, would that include record keepers and historians by any chance?
Well, of course it would. And only the ones that keep accurate records, So we're ruling out, NRL.com here. Look.
All right. Well,
you could make you could make a really good argument for somebody that does keep the game's records and that gathers the game's history together, right? And look, I'm thinking of someone like Ian Heads right now.
Well, that's the reason why I selected him, because he's taken the time to. Because that's the thing, okay, with a lot of these historians, while they'll report the good and the bad, it's part of what you do. Most of the time you're recording about, what happened in the game because you want to record something about how great it was. Yeah. And you generally are talking it up, even if you do have to talk about some of the negative stuff that happened. And it takes a great passion for the game. Mm-hmm. To delve into that sort of stuff, where a lot of the times there's no sources available other than what might be written somewhere. Yeah. And even in those cases, there may not even be stuff written, as I've found with a few players I've been trying to find information on. So it makes the researching there so much harder, so much more time consuming, and a lot of the times it's either unpaid or underappreciated. So, Ian Heads, for me, is streets ahead of everybody else in that list by a long way.
Yeah, and you know what? To me, he is too, right? And he's the only person I've talked about in the whole list, because the rest of them I just know. And in that case, right, if you've got someone like that, because the people that write about the game's history are the only people that are putting this together. The game itself doesn't put this stuff together. And it's well overdue for the Rugby League administration to bring people like Ian Heads, like yourself, and other Rugby League historians into the fold and get them being actual contributors to the game and being part of Rugby League rather than an outsider. Because, if you leave it up to Rugby League just moves on. Rugby League doesn't really care too much about its own history. And it's up to people that are Rugby League historians to do that work. I know that it's not easy, and that, you go down all sorts of rabbit holes and stuff, and you've got to find things that, you're looking for things that sometimes you don't even know exist until you find them. I would like to see the game really value its history way more than it does. And historians are a very important part of that. But I would much rather it be about a contribution to the game's history and gathering the game's history rather than having journalists and media types. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I'm not keen on... I'm not keen on having outright journos there. I don't think that's right. But yeah, people have contributed to recording the game's past and its history and all sorts of stuff. I've got a lot of respect for them because I know what they have to go through just for whatever work they do. Yeah. And it takes dedication and a passion for the game to do that, whereas a journo can write any old crap today and move on. And they're basically going to get nominated based just on longevity. And that's easy to do in the rugby league media world.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing is too, if you put, and eventually if you're saying all of these people are worthy of nomination, over time, if they've got to add somebody into the Hall of Fame, all of these people are going to end up in the Hall of Fame, right? Who's next?
Who's next?
You know,
that's right.
At what point do you start? At what point do you look at this list and Paul Crawley's on it? And you know what? It sounds like a joke, but down the track, this is what you're looking at.
That's exactly right.
And it's just that's why I find it disgusting because you know I can look through this list and be like, well, yeah, he called the game, great. You know, it's like, what is that? What are you nominating them alongside players for? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, I get your point entirely there, mate. So the next one there might be a little bit, I don't know, iffy on that one, is commentators.
Yeah.
And it's their job to call the game, I guess, and you can't do that if you don't enjoy it either. So they nominated Frank Hyde, George Lovejoy, David Morrow, Rex Mossop, and Ray Warren. I've gone with Frank Hyde. One person who I'm surprised isn't nominated was Ernie Black, whose nickname was Tiger.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the first radio commentators to call the game in Australia. I'm surprised he isn't listed.
When was he from? What era was he from?
20s, I believe.
Wow. I would love to hear his calling of the game, hey?
I've got a feeling, I'm going off memory here, so I could very well be wrong, that he called the 1924 final between Balmain and South.
Wow.
I haven't got it written down anywhere, so I'm purely going off memory there, but I think he may have called that on radio. It might have been the first final that was called on radio.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone knows any differently, feel free to correct me. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was around there. So I thought he might have got picked for that.
See, if I had to, I would go Frank Hyde. I'm
picking Frank Hyde as well.
Yeah, but it would be also as part of his playing career. Like, it would be not so much picking him as a broadcaster. It'd be like, you know, he had a very good playing career, and he just so happened to be a commentator as well. You know, that's the way I would look at it. And I think there is a place, and it's kind of like what we were talking about with the referees earlier. It's like, if you just called him a broadcaster, you'd be doing him a disservice because of all of the other stuff that he did.
Exactly.
So, because personally, I would not have any broadcasters in there either.
I don't mind the commentators so much, but really the only ones I can think of there are the ones who added to the game to sort of ramp it up and make it more exciting, stuff like that. I know it doesn't sound like much, but I don't mind people who have dedicated their lives to doing that. I know they've been paid for it. But the only commentators I can think of who should be on that list alongside Frank Hyde for the sheer volume that they do and the sheer success of it would be Ray Warren, Andrew Voss. That'd be about it.
Well, here's the thing, right? Just say it's about, if you look at it as just a commentator and contributing to the game and maybe bringing it to a different audience or whatever, the first cab off the rank has to be Darryl Eastlake, doesn't it? Because of his origin calls.
He'd definitely be up there. The only thing the reason why I'm huge on Andrew Voss though is he talks about the game with absolute love for the game. And if anyone's seen his show, The Fan, he talks about the history of the game. He's a genuine student of the game. And to me, he almost falls into the same category as Ian Heads, where he actually takes the time to learn about the game. I can respect that. He researches everything he does very, very meticulously. And he goes to the effort to make shows to, explain this stuff from the past and promote it and talk about it in a positive light. He's bringing the history of the game to everybody. And I really, really like that he does that. It's another thing that I think deserves a lot of recognition for him for that, which no one before him has ever done. And it's that little bit extra that he does there that I think means that he deserves to be mentioned in this list of commentators, but he isn't. You got people like George Lovejoy, who's a huge commentator up in Brisbane, and I'm pretty sure he was the guy who coined the phrase "rugby league was the greatest game of all." But most people in Sydney may not have heard of him. David Morrow had a long career on the ABC. Rex Mossop, he's pretty famous for what happened in the 70s and 80s as a commentator. He was fairly abrasive, though, I guess you could say.
Don't like people who are abrasive, hey? I'm just kidding. That's my thing.
It's not who we are. But there we go. All right, so we'll go into the important part now, and that's the Hall of Fame player shortlist. So we've got the final 25 players here. Now, for me, the historian, it's a little bit of a disappointing field because every single player here is from post-1950. Mm-hmm. It's almost like they've decided, right, that's it. We are not looking at anyone pre-World War II ever again. That's it. We're done.
Which is very strange. I don't understand that mindset, hey?
They've just cut off 42 years of rugby league history. Just bang, we've done that. We're moving on.
And maybe
not up for debate anymore.
What you could definitely call a golden era in the game's history, just gone.
Yeah, all gone. We're not looking at that anymore, which I find quite disappointing. Because for me, there's still a few players there that could go on the list. Like one is a brilliant Brisbane winger, Cecil Ainsley. He's a massive try-scoring freak. He played in Brisbane, though, never played in Sydney.
Yeah.
So he's never really going to get recognised for that. But for me, he deserves to be on this list as much as anybody else does. So it disappoints me that they've just shut that off so quickly. And even then, the players that they've got from 1950 to 1970 are very few on this list as well. It's pretty much 1980s onwards.
Yeah, I mean, you and me have watched the vast majority of these players. Like, there's only a few here that we wouldn't have seen play.
Yeah. And so out of the 119 years, almost 110 years, whatever it is, 110 years of competition, we're now drawing Hall of Famers from basically the last 30 now.
Yeah. So do you reckon we should go through the list of nominees and then talk about like how many we can select from this list for the Hall of Fame? And go from there, talk about the Hall of Fame a little bit more in general.
Yeah, so I'll go through the players and we'll pick out four each who we think should go ahead and be in the Hall of Fame. So they've put them by position here. So they've got at fullback Eric Sims, Gary Belcher, Gary Jack. On the wing, Dennis Flannery, Ian Moyer, Michael Hancock. Centres, Steve Renouf, Michael O'Connor. 5/8 Kevin Walters. Halfback, Jeff Tuvey, Stacey Jones, Greg Alexander. At lock, Les Cowie, Bob Lidner. Second row, Dick Thornett, Terry Randall, Rod Reddy, Paul Vaughton, Paul Sirinen, Craig Fitzgibbon. Prop, Craig Young, Ruben Wiki, Paul Harrigan. And hooker, Elwyn Walters and Danny Badeiras.
Yeah, I mean, and look, that's when we talk about these players, you got to remember we're talking about them in terms of the elite players that have ever played the game in Australia. So we're not saying these players are bad players when we say anything bad about them. All right.
What we're trying to do is pick the cream from the crop here because I mean they've all played Test footy. They are all fantastic players. That's not up for debate here. We're trying to pick out which ones out of this lot are more deserving of being in the Hall of Fame than the others, which is not an easy thing to do.
And the thing I look at too is you want to pick players that in 50 years' time, they're relevant to somebody who in 50 years' time is looking at the game's history and they want to see the standout players. And so you're trying to show that person in 50 years from now who the standout players on a century plus timeline are.
Yeah. So for me, the first and obvious chip pick for me out of this is the only player of those 25 who won the Golden Boot back when it was a prestigious and accurately awarded title, and that was Gary Jack. For me, he has to be in there. I think he's top of the tree. Next, I've got Ian Moyer. Lightning fast, excitingly fast winger. I just think that he was massively underrated, especially as time's gone on, what he able to achieve there. Because I think everyone just looked at Ken Irvine instead, and it kind of dwarfed everyone. But Ian Moyer was no slouch. Kevin Walters, what's he got? 6 premierships? That's hard to ignore.
Yeah, and I was thinking that
especially
too.
6 premierships in the salary cap era.
And over a long period of time too.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like he was just in one team that had a really good run. Like it's a very long time between his first and last one.
Yeah. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And the last one I have is Ruben Wiki.
Yep.
I found it hard to consider. I think the only other one I was debating over was Steve Renouf, because for me he was something different compared to everybody else when he came on the field, and he was exciting. You just got the feeling too, especially when there's a little bit of broken field play, even though Brisbane were inside their own half, that he was a chance of scoring a try, even though he was 80 metres away, because he just did it so often. And I think that sort of freakish ability is something that makes one player stand out from the people around him.
Yeah, and I mean, how long was he? Could you consider him the top centre in the game? I mean, it was a very, very, very long time, especially when you look at it. Like, if you think of the great centres that have played since him, none of them have really, apart from maybe Inglis, but Inglis moved around from different positions. None of them, as a pure centre, could you say was the best in the game for as long as Renouf was in the last 30 years, anyway.
Yeah, if you had to pick a team of the last 30 years, he is going to be the centre there, absolutely. The only player that's going to come up there and challenge him over the last 30 years will be Mal Meninga, I guess.
Yeah. Now he's obviously already in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So are they your 4?
They're my 4, yeah.
Okay. My 4. Look, my 4. I find it really difficult looking at this list of players. My 4, I'd probably go with Badiris, because we've talked about how the game almost has eras that you can line up with the best hookers at the time. And I think for quite a long time, Badiris was the player, and he handed it off to Cameron Smith, and we're currently still in the Cameron Smith era. But I think there's no doubt that, I had Badiris as the best player in the world for 1 year there. Fantastic. One of the first picked for New South Wales, one of the first picked for Australia, and very good record, very good player, very skillful, tough, good defender. So I had Badiris as one of them. Next cab off the rank, Ruben Wiki. Achieved a lot in Canberra as a centre, it's kind of funny to think about that. Then went over to the Warriors and as a forward was a top forward as well. Played so many test matches for New Zealand. I think he still holds the record. Fantastic. Yeah. I think, in fact, didn't he hold the world record? He might still.
He did briefly. I think Cameron Smith's got it now.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, Ruben Wiki. And that's something that you can't look past, I think, is that international record of his. After that, I find it really, really, really difficult. I look at someone like a Greg Alexander, who I think was a very different footballer when he came along. We've kind of described him a little bit like a Kalen Ponga.
Yeah, he was when he came along. I mean, this is around the time too that we had the likes of Scott Gale, who was doing the little chip and chase type things, no exciting little things like that. Brandy had that, but he also had great speed and the amazing ability in that time to be able to play fullback and in the halves, which was just unheard of.
Exactly, and it's something that we take for granted today for a few of the most elite players, and he was kind of the first of those players, and he's so far ahead of his time when you think about it. Like, when was the next player that come along that could do that sort of stuff as well? And so I would probably lean towards him a little bit.
Yep.
And then after that, it's probably between Renouf and Walters, and I'd probably lean towards Renouf in terms of I'm looking at outstanding talent, and I think you could play a clip of Renouf to somebody in 50 years' time and they'd be like, wow, this guy's carving them up. Whereas Walters was a different sort of player. Like, he was never the sort of player that grabbed a team by the scruff of the neck and forced them to win a game, like, say, for instance, I think an Andrew Johns or a Darren Lockyer has done. So I would probably lean towards Renouf in that sense.
That's fair enough. They're pretty good picks. I mean, it showed too that the fact that we doubled up on Ruben Wiki.
Yep.
And we both had Renouf pretty, I had Renouf in the top 5. You had him in your top 4.
Yeah.
Shows that the rest of them might be a little bit too far behind. If we could come, essentially with six or seven players between the two of us out of all of that. I think it shows that there is a bit of a gap starting to emerge between the absolute elite and the next rung down.
Yeah, and I think that for both of us, we could have somebody sit down and have and try and argue against who we've selected, and would be able to make a really good argument about it as well. And it's difficult. It is very, very difficult. I guess, and I guess this is moving into the next sort of phase of this podcast, is what should a Hall of Fame be about? What is the goal of having a Hall of Fame? And are you looking to give recognition to players that maybe get lost in the history of the game? Or are you looking to select the players that define the game, or ones that are generally just the elite talent of their time and their era, and who stand up against almost any era? And I think that what the Rugby League Hall of Fame is supposed to be is maybe different for everyone. And before the podcast, you and me were talking about it, that we're very similar in terms of how we view the history of the game and where we believe cutoff points are and things like that between very, very good players and the all-time greats. And yet I think you and me could write down what we believe the Hall of Fame should be, and it would be two different things, as close as we are in terms of how we look at the game is.
Yeah, they wouldn't be. I don't think they'd be too diametrically opposed, but there'd be differences. But for me, you've got to try and find that unique balance, which is hard to do, between the ability someone had skill-wise, I suppose, the wow factor that they had when they're on the field, like how many people came to watch them, how often did they get talked about, man of match performance and stuff like that. And then you need also the sheer volume of data, the stats that backs up their greatness. It's one thing to go and say that, Dave Brown was he was a good point scorer. But when you see that he scored 45 points in one game that's never been matched, you go, okay, he's that far ahead of the field. That's something that needs to be recognised. And so you can use stats to help an argument in that regard. And I think they're important. You need to have the numbers to back up, a case for someone as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to get that fine balance between what they did on the field, how they were reported and seen by the community and the fans, and how the stats stack up as well. There's certain things that will get included sometimes, like did they win premierships, stuff like that. Winning premierships is important. It would have been. It's hard for a lot of reasons in a lot of different eras. So in the early days of the game, where there was limited tackles, so long as your team was good at holding the ball, you were likely going to win the game. Yeah. And then in the modern day, you've got the salary cap, which evens things out. You've got 10-metre rules. You've got limited tackles. The game is designed to make every single team as evenly matched as possible, which makes it hard to win premierships. So
you know what, though? I could also see the argument where the salary cap makes it easier for an elite player to have a chance. Because you can imagine being a great player during St. George's run, where you could have literally played, and it didn't happen, but you could have literally played in 10 grand finals and not won a grand final because you weren't on the right team.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, because we haven't had a back-to-back premier since the early 90s, does that make it easier to be in a team that wins a premiership?
I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But Parramatta fans would argue with you.
Yeah, but they're Parramatta fans. I mean, does it really matter? They don't matter. They're like
Canberra. How about Raiders fans then?
Raiders have plenty of premierships. They can't be complaining about anything.
Yeah, but I mean, they've now got kids who are in their mid-20s who have never seen Canberra hold up the trophy.
Yeah, that's good, isn't it? Well, let's look at it this way. Let's go the last 30 years, okay? Who are the best players to have not won a premiership? A New South Wales Rugby League / NRL premiership.
Okay. Andrew Ettinghausen?
Yes.
The
King, Wally Lewis?
Has he played? Oh, I suppose he probably has. Last 30 years, you say? 89. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Wally. Drawing a blank for some reason. Gary Jack.
And like we're starting to name, and apart from ET, like you have to kind of think back to really early 90s. There's not too many players, say post 2000, or even just in the NRL era, 98 onwards, that you could say were great players, like properly all-time great players that didn't win a premiership.
Highmarsh?
Hindy would probably be up there, yep.
Who else could you see? Mark Coyne?
Yeah, and it's a very, that's a drop down. Mark Coyne was a very good player, but there is a drop between, say, the Renoffs and Inglis's and players down to Mark Coyne. It's the all-time greats in the NRL era, especially, they tend to win a premiership. Like you even look at, say, for instance, Benji Marshall and Robbie Farah. Right now, if they had not won a premiership, we would probably look at both of them very, very, very differently.
I've got this theory that I don't think many people. I think people easily forget that they had won a premiership. Because the 2005 title just sort of came out of the blue, and then it's just been 14 years of constantly finishing ninth, except for 2 seasons. So people don't see him as premiership winners; just see him. Oh yeah, they're the blokes who are always finishing just outside the 8.
Well, you look at let's look at Robbie, because I feel as though Benji, between the premiership win, right, and what he did in the 2008 World Cup, and what he's done at international level in general, but especially the 2008 World Cup, where you and me both still see international rugby league as the ultimate marker for what you are as an elite player.
Absolutely.
And that 2008 performance by him in the World Cup final stands up against any international performance ever. But Robbie Farah hasn't had that at international level. He hasn't had that moment, that game where you could point to and say, "Wow, look at this thing. He won a World Cup final." You know.
Yeah.
So
I think the problem he's got there though is that who did Benji Marshall, I guess, have to compete with for his position in the Kiwi side? And then you look at who Robbie Farah had to compete with for his rep honours. He had Danny Medeiros and Cameron Smith.
100%. I agree 100%.
Benji had... Who were 5'8" for New Zealand before Benji Marshall?
Oh, there was... Was
it Robbie Paul?
What about the great Gene Namu?
Oh, well... I feel bad for forgetting that one.
Who was there was a 5'8", then he took over from him. Who was it? Come on.
I'm going to try and find out.
Yeah, maybe look that one up. Who was it? I feel like they were like a fixture.
Fixture? Lance O'Hire? Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking of him.
Is this a Robbie Paul? I
think it's Lance O'Hire I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I feel bad for our Kiwi friends there. I can't figure out who it was before Benji. Yeah. Kind of makes my point though.
But that's the point. It's like you get a Benji come in. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is if all Benji Marshall had was what he did at international level, if he had ninth place his whole club career, and then at international level he drops that, and it's in a performance that stands at the test of time, I think he would still have a certain all-time great level that you could put on him.
Yep.
But Farah wouldn't have the same luxury, and as you say, he's behind some of the all-time greats. Unfortunately for him, he's in an era where Medeiros Medeiros at the top of his game decides that he's going to sit out a test series, and he lets the young bloke called Cameron Smith take his jersey and never gets it back, right? So Robbie Farah a little bit unlucky in that sense. But if he hadn't won a premiership, you would be looking at Robbie Farah differently, I believe. Now, and that's rightly or wrongly. Now, I'm not saying that you need a premiership to be an all-time great. I don't believe that at all. But it's interesting in the NRL era, at least, that the elite players do tend to get a premiership.
Yeah, except for those who play for Balmain.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing, is that you could probably argue that one of Balmain's most dominant-looking sides in their entire history was one that never won a premiership. And that was that side from between, 88 to 1990.
Yeah.
And you had the likes of Tim Brasher, Gary Freeman, Steve Roach, Paul Siren, and Benny Elias, Wayne Pearce. They're all in there.
Mm-hmm.
Never won premierships.
And it's weird because that was an era in the game where, and when we were growing up, the thing was, you got to lose one to win one.
Yeah. And they just lost two and never got back in.
Yeah.
So it's a fair point you make. Before that, though, I think there's plenty who deserve immortality status even, but never won a premiership, like Ken Irvine.
100%.
Frank Birch is an immortal, never won a premiership.
Yeah.
So it does show that, thankfully, being a premiership winner isn't being considered as a certainty, a prerequisite for being an immortal.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think some players can just be absolute standouts in a team just that isn't.
Definitely. And the thing is, too, and we've talked a little bit about this. I need to stop saying that. It's what we do. It's a podcast, for Christ's sakes. But the marker for the entire season never used to be the premiership. Like, the big thing wasn't the premiership. It was always the Test Series or Kangaroo Tour. And that's where your legends were made. Whereas these days, I feel as though there's Origin and the Premiership, and it's not as much about Test, or maybe hasn't been as much about Test footy as it should have been. Now, I think that we're seeing some changes to that every so often, and as I said, the Benji Marshall World Cup game in 2008, Jason Taumalolo's performances for Tonga, I definitely think is something that is a throwback to the days where what you did in international football was how you were rated. And I think it gave him a big step up in terms of he was a very good club player, but when he was doing that in the test arena, it was like, this is something different now. And it's interesting that the marker these days, though, is very different to what it used to be, going back further than 30 years, where it was like, you weren't an elite player unless you'd done it on the international stage. You just weren't.
That's right. So I guess we move on now. I wanted to briefly talk about the Immortals. Well, it's not in discussion at the moment. Last year they inducted a few more Immortals, and I put up an idea for a system which I think was smarter and fairer, where 2 players would be nominated and made an Immortal out of every decade.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a system. All you had to do was play at least one game in that decade to get nominated. So if you're a great player, you played from 1965 to 1975. If you didn't qualify in the 60s decade, you could still qualify for the 70s one.
Yeah,
simple. So this is what I come up with, and I started from 1900 to help make this work.
Mm-hmm.
So 1900 to 1909, I've got Dally Messenger and Arthur Halloway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everyone knows Dally. Most people don't know Arthur Halloway. He's the most successful coach in Premiership history. Also a great player. There's even a story about how he went to work one day as a butcher, cut off his finger, just wrapped up the stub in some cloth, and then went and played footy that afternoon for Balmain, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Tough little fella. 1910 to 1919, Duncan Thompson and Frank Birch. Frank Birch is already an Immortal. Duncan Thompson should have been one ages ago.
Yep.
1920 to 1929, Harold Horder and Jimmy Craig. Jimmy Craig was famously called Mr. Versatile. He played nearly every single position on the field. He played in Queensland and helped them turn around their miserable interstate record with New South Wales, and then made them the dominant force for nearly a decade.
And that turnaround was massive too. It was like from just being easy beats to, as you say, they were the ones to beat all of a sudden.
Exactly. And he won a premiership in nearly every single season he played in Sydney, which is
incredible.
Insane. 30 to 39, Dave Brown, who's already Immortal, and Herb Steinort, great forward from Queensland. Excuse me. 1940 to 49, Clive Churchill, another Immortal, and Duncan Hall, possibly our best known prop from that era. Sorry. 50 to 59, Reg Gasnier and Norm Proven, Immortals. 60 to 69, Langlands and Raper, both Immortals. 70 to 79, Beatson and Fulton, both Immortals. 80 to 89, Lewis and Meninga, both Immortals. So now we get to the bit where we start doing a bit of debate, I guess, and that is 1990 to 99. I've put down Brad Fittler and Andrew Johns. Would you argue with any of those? I mean, Andrew Johns is an Immortal anyway, so he's got to stay there. So would you argue with Brad Fittler being there?
No, he's the first player I thought of. 100%.
Because the only other ones that would come into that discussion would be Langer, Daly. I guess that's about it, really.
Yeah, I like Langer Daly.
Sterling would qualify.
He'd qualify, huh? Yeah, look, I can't pick Sterlo ahead of Johns.
No, Johns is a lock because he's already an immortal, so they have to start. The ones that have already been named are in there.
When did Brett Kenny retire?
Oh, good one. I think it might have been 92.
Yeah. Man, you could make a case for Brett Kenny.
93.
And it's not really his. It's kind of not his era, right?
Yeah.
But he would qualify.
Yeah.
And man, I tell you what, because I could see where you could do Fittler and Kenny, and then in the next decade, who have you got in the next decade?
Well, this is where it gets tricky. So the next decade, 2000 to 09, I've got Cameron Smith and Darren Lockyer. Because from 2010 to 2019, I've got Thurston and Slater.
Damn, and it gets tricky.
So if you want to move Fittler into the 2000s, you'd have to move Smith or Lockyer into the 2010s and drop one of Thurston or Slater.
See, I would be happy enough to move Smith into the 2010s, right?
Yep.
And so, I could see where you could make, and I'm not saying that this is what I would do, but I could see where you could make an argument where you'd have Kenny and Fittler as for your 90s players, and then have Lockyer and Johns as your 2000s players, and then you would have Smith, and then I would probably have to go Slater as your Tans players. I've got to have both of them ahead of Thurston.
I do agree on that. So that was a similar deliberation I had. It was whether Fittler should be in there and whether I was missing someone else, I guess. Because there was a lot of great players around that late 80s, early 90s period.
Yeah, and look, I think of Kenny is an 80s player. Like, Kenny is just an 80s player, right?
Oh, yeah, but I mean, we've got Wally and Mal there, I guess.
Yeah. And look, I could see where you could, say, have Mal as a 90s player and Kenny as an 80s player. Maybe that gives a little bit more balance to it, I guess. You know.
Well, that's the thing, though. The decade doesn't have to define the player. It's just a structure I had in place so that you're picking two from every decade, but it could be, as I said, if you wanted Sterlo in there, but you couldn't fit him in 80, 89 because Wally and Mal's there, you could put him in the 90s because he still played there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way of getting them named, I guess, if that's a loophole. So that was the idea I had in place, was two every decade.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we don't have to have the next discussion until 2029 or 2030. Yeah, and it's just every decade you anoint two more immortals.
What if you made it one per decade?
Ooh.
That makes it really, really difficult, right? But to me, that maybe makes it the elite level it should be.
I'll ask you this then. Of the 13 current immortals,
yes,
who would you drop?
I would probably drop.
I was going to say, to put in context, you've got Gasnier, Proven, Langlands, and Raper, who all played around the same time, as well as Arthur Beetson and Bob Fulton. They all played in that period from the mid to late 50s to the mid 70s.
Yeah. If I had to drop anyone from the current list of immortals, and it's based purely on football, and that's how I think it should be. It should be about football. I would drop Langlands.
Okay.
And this is, it doesn't matter who I say. It doesn't matter who anyone says of this list. You're dropping an all-time great that is unquestionably one of the great players of all time. There's no one on the list here that you go, oh, yeah, him. But if I had to drop someone off this list, the one I would probably drop off would be Langlands.
For me, it'd be Meninga.
Wow, really?
If I had to drop anyone, because
Yeah.
I think pretty much, and Proven probably as well.
Wow.
Because for me, right, I want the Immortals to be not just players who were, they got great records,
Yeah.
but they were phenomenal at what they did.
Yeah.
Like, there was no one before them that did what they did, and there's no one's, and it took ages for the rest of the competition to catch up with them. You look at the remaining players there. Clive Churchill broke the mould. Johnny Raper, same. He changed the way locks played. Reg Gasnier, he had pace and speed, which a lot of centres didn't possess then. And back then, all the wingers were massive try scorers, not the centres. He was a massive try scoring centre. Bob Fulton could play centre and in the halves. Another one who just an outright. He took the game to the professional level before it even thought it needed it. Langlands was he was a freak of a back. He could play centre, wing, fullback. Massively long career, great point scorer. I can see where you're coming from there, how you can drop him, but to me, he was untouchable for so long in a period where there was plenty of good players around. He was just one of those first pick players for a decade. You just had to have him in there.
Yeah.
Wally Lewis, I mean, the bloke was an absolute freak. Arthur Beaton, the same. He changed the way forwards played the game, not just props, but all forwards.
Yep.
Andrew Johns, again, great defensive half, but the attack was obviously more important, and he was great at that. But the fact that he could put on massive hits on forwards and hit like a second rower, it changed the way people looked at halfbacks to the point that now everyone sits there saying, oh, this halfback's crap because he can't tackle. Nearly every single halfback in the game's history could not tackle, but ever since Andrew Johns came along, it's now become a prerequisite that a halfback must be a good defender as well.
Yeah, or the other thing is, too, they've got to absolutely dominate the entire contest. And it's like, do you realize you're talking about maybe the one halfback in history that has the ability to do that? You're lining him up against that. It's funny, isn't it?
And so that's the thing, is it's like a catalyst that changes the way people look at the game, and that's what these players are. Dally Messenger was another one. Frank Burge, a try-scoring forward. It was unheard of, and even for 60, 70 years after him, it was still unheard of. It wasn't until Steve Menzies came along that we got to see the evolution of Frank Burge, which is crazy that it went that long.
Yeah.
And again, there's been no one since Menzies do that.
Yeah.
It just shows you how rare a talent he was. Dave Brown, the bloke was a point-scoring freak. Just an absolute anomaly. He is, when it comes to sheer data, he is rugby league's Don Bradman. And if he had had a 300-game career or a 400-game career, there is not a person in the game who would ever get near him for points scored in their career.
No.
So, whereas for me, Norm Provan was undoubtedly a phenomenal player, but I can't make the same argument that he broke the mold and revolutionised the role the same way the other players did. Same with Mal Meninga. Mal was a big forward, but he also played at the same time as another player out there who could play in the back row and the centres, and that was Gene Miles. So he wasn't breaking the mold. There were already players who were playing the game at the same time as him who were similar style. And he came around the same time. You had Eric Groth, similar build, dynamic ball runner, same sort of thing. So I don't see Mal as being one of those dynamic players who changed the role either. And so it's got to the point where if I'm going to look at Immortals, I'm going to look at the players who revolutionised the role. And that's why I've been so strong about pushing for Duncan Thompson to be in there, because he brought in players like runarounds and things like this that just had not been seen before. Block plays were, everyone talks about them nowadays, but little things like that, using decoy runners, intricate things. And it was his teachings. He taught Wayne Bennett some of this stuff. Wayne Bennett uses it today. That means Duncan Thompson's legacy is 100 years old and still seen in the game today to some small degree. It's just ridiculous, and he's not even in there. So if I was to make it, I'd be looking at Provan, Meninga. If I had to drop anyone, I'm not saying I would,
Yes.
though. I'm happy with him being there.
It's really interesting because I was really happy when they finally put Proven in there.
Likewise.
I think it needed to happen. And I kind of look at Proven in a similar sense of Wally Lewis, in that sometimes somebody comes along that's a bit of a force of nature in terms of their competitiveness, and they're the one that drives something special along. And I think Proven did that for the Dragons during their incredible run. I also think if you look at him, I mean, he was a giant. I mean, compared to the players he was playing against, he was just a giant of a man. Still is, really.
One of the first few giants that we had in the game too.
Yeah, exactly. And with Meninga, I mean, he just was the standard for so long for me, and especially as his career matured on and he changed as a player. You know, he filled out more, but he was always like he was the standard. And the 4 kangaroo tours is just, and it'll never be done, never be achieved again, unfortunately. But that was unbelievable, and he was a goal kicker, and he was just something that he was just the standard for so long, and that's, to me, it's something that I'm very happy for him to be named an immortal, and I thought it was worthy of it.
That's interesting though, because Langlands was the standard for so long as well too, but you're happy to omit him.
Very, very true. You know, and how do you line one up against the other and say, you know, I want him in, but I could drop him. It's a very difficult thing. I would be happy if there was not another immortal added to this list for the next 20 or 30 years. I think of the players that have been that are not in this list. I think Duncan Thompson, as you say, in terms of modern day players, I think that Cameron Smith will be on it, but absolutely. I would be happy if no one else was added after that. You know, even Slater. You know, I just think that this list should be set in stone for quite some time, because I think it does what it was meant to achieve, and I don't want to see the Immortals concept watered down.
No, but in saying that, I think an argument can be made for Lockyer, Smith, and Slater in the future. May not be straight away, but I think in the future I can see them as the only 3 modern day players who should definitely be strongly considered for immortal status, along with Duncan Thompson from the past as well.
I'd agree completely with that, and I guess I would be willing to. And look, oh man, I love Darren Lockyer, and I really do. I rate Darren Lockyer with Andrew Johns in terms of his impact on the game. I mean, Darren Lockyer was a better winner than Andrew Johns. And Slater, I mean, geez, I'd be happy to leave Slater out. I think that you have to draw a line somewhere. So
I rate him as the best fullback we've had since Churchill.
Man, that's a big call.
It is, but I just think that pretty much every fullback we had prior to him, when you think about it, they were ball runners.
Yeah.
Slater was the first one to come along since Churchill and turned the fullback role into a second 5/8 role as well, as still being a fullback.
He did change it a bit, didn't he?
And you've now got Tedesco doing it. You've got, a lot of clubs have got fullbacks who are doing the same sort of thing now, where they chime in the back line and play as a second 5/8. It now means that a lot of teams don't have to have a ball carrier or a ball player at 6. They can put a centre or a second rower there and just have your 5/8 at fullback.
But the thing is, though, would you put Slater ahead of Gutherson?
Well, wasn't expecting that.
No, I don't think anyone was.
That's very true. Wow.
Because Gutherson, obviously one of Wentworth's greatest ever players.
See, this is gonna cause me to actually have to throw up a counter as well.
Okay.
Would you put Moses in there ahead of Lockyer?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Have you seen him play? He scored that try at the stadium. Did you see it?
There was this. I remember watching a game. I think it might have been one of the first few games that Moses played for Parramatta after he left the Tigers.
Yeah.
And there was a play went down the short side, and Moses was, I think he was second receiver.
Yeah.
And he passed the ball on to someone else, who then drew a defender and passed quickly to someone else who did a quick catch and pass, and they scored a try in the corner.
Yeah.
So Moses was 4 passes away from the actual try being scored, and yet the commentators raved about the pass he threw, which was just a standard run 2 steps and pass to your right.
That sounds like everything that has happened to Mitchell Pearce over the last 10 years.
And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
that was nuts. Look at this great ball here from Moses. And I went, no, players throw that all the time, every week. He didn't draw a defender. He didn't do anything. He just grabbed the ball and passed it because he needed to. He's either going to get smashed or passed. That's his job, is to pass.
Yeah.
Someone else passed it, and someone drew a defender and passed, catch pass, and then there was a try at the end. You went. It was Rad Raja who scored. They weren't talking about the craziness of Rad Raja beating 95 players and running 600 kilometres to score the try. It was all about, Moses passed the ball.
That's hilarious.
Steady on people, Jesus. There we go. That's our talk of the Hall of Fame, the Immortals. Yeah, that's a good yak.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it is interesting that everyone's going to have a different opinion on this. And none of them are wrong, except if you're a journalist, then you are wrong. But
or if you disagree with us.
Yeah, or if you disagree with us in any way, you're wrong.
We're experts.
Yeah, we are experts. So yeah, it's been a really good discussion. I think it's a nice discussion having retro around. It's great to be able to talk about all of these old players and things like that and their contributions to the game. And I mean, rugby league is just absolutely blessed with true legends and characters and elite talent. And you've got athletes and you've got skill-based players and you've got powerful players and speed players and big men and small men, and it's just what a special, special sport.
Fantastic. So thanks for tuning in. We do have an interview coming up. It has been postponed, but it is going to be an absolute cracker. We are itching to do that one.
Yeah, it's going to be good fun.
Absolutely. And we've got a live show coming up sometime soon. What day should we do a live show?
I guess we could do one this week.
There's one.
Didn't we have one lined up? You know what we were thinking of was Penrith versus Cronulla.
That's right, tomorrow night.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's listen to me either be pumped up about how Penrith's going to win the premiership now, or just going off my head, ripping in. It's going to be good either way.
Yeah, I'll either be stirring you up to try and get you more fired up after a big win, or I'll be stirring you up after you've had a loss, trying to make you start killing stuff.
Jeez, thanks.
We might lose another intern.
Speaking of losing another intern, we need 3 new interns. I don't want to talk about it.
Not again.
Yeah.
Man.
Yep.
Have you got enough towels?
Yeah. I'm going to have to buy some new ones, though.
All right. I've got some here. I'll send some more up.
We
get them in bulk now from our supplier.
Nice.
Yeah. All righty. On that slightly disturbing note, we'll say goodbye. Thanks for listening, people.
Bye-bye, everyone.